Welcome back to Professionality, a series where we engage in conversation with industry leaders to understand their perspective on latest trends and innovation. In today's episode, we have Beverly Aisha. She is an international security expert with an extensive experience in conflict zone, combining her intelligence and military background and martial art training. She delivers specialized security programs, including Women Focus Initiative. So join us in conversation with her, where she shares some very insightful experiences and points from her journey. Okay, hi Beverly. So nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
Thank you so much. So, Beverly, I wanted to understand that how did your time in the military shape your approach to crisis management and leadership in conflict zones?
Well, my time in the military just taught me a lot about working and living in every facet of my post-military life. It wasn't just about crisis management or whatever. There's a lot of things we take from the military, but I obviously I brought some crucial tools with me as well. Um, And I would say the one that jumps out at me the most, and it's not just about crisis management, it's about taking a tool from the military to a non-military environment, and that's teamwork. Um, I've worked in organizations where they say teamwork is so important, but nobody seems to really understand. It's not palpable. It's not something you can feel or describe or make happen. Um, and it means being able to work with like-minded people and maybe people who are not so like-minded, who don't work the same way we do, who don't do things the same way we do. So in some situations, like a crisis situation, that can be really difficult. But in the military, we knew we had to work together. And it didn't mean that we had to like them, but we would always find ways to work as a team to accomplish the goal. There was always the mission and trying to maintain the objective. What is it that we're trying to get to? And I find outside of the military that sometimes that gets shifted, that there's not quite an understanding of what it means to be a team. There's this, we've all got it, it's all love and flowers, but it's not always going to be like that. And so bringing that in is really important. Um, Time management, that's another one. And yeah, we learned that outside the military as well, but time management, we learned time appreciation from the earliest days of our military career. I spent 21 years in the Canadian military, and yeah, the time appreciation, sometimes it was under regular conditions, things were happening just normally, and we still have to do time appreciation to make sure we're getting things done on time. But we also learned under artificial conditions, so exercises where something has to be done in a really urgent manner, but we were trained to do that. So in the outside world and the outside the military world, that's not always something that people have ingrained. Um, and it depends on culture as well. So working with different cultures means that that time appreciation might shift a little bit. Um, if I'm going to do something in India, it's going to be different than if I'm doing it in Canada or if I'm doing it in Thailand. Um, some places time is not as critical, and so you have to build that in to your mindset, because it also it avoids frustration as well. So during a crisis, though, really important to make sure that the people on your team understand the importance of that time management and making sure that you're getting things done um, in a timely fashion. Later in my career, I would just give you an example of that. We were assisting nationals with voluntary departure from Afghanistan after the fall of Kabul to the Taliban. And so time management was critical in our planning and operation process. We were in different time zones because everybody was out because of COVID. So I was in Turkey, someone was in UK, some were in Manila, some were in Afghanistan, some were in Tajikistan, some were in Pakistan. And this was, our team that was trying to plan and make everything work. And so we really had to be aware of time zones. And we experienced challenge after challenge, and we had to make things work within specific timeframes. So that was really important. And I would say the last, I mean, there were a ton of things I took with me, but rather than go on, critical analysis is another takeaway from, and that was from my military intelligence background in particular. But I started in the military as a radio technician, and I became an officer later in my career. So I went as an intelligence officer. I went to Royal Military College, and all of those things, whether it was studying at university, fixing critical equipment, or doing analysis, it all required analytical skills. And so those were really important. When I was fault finding a radio, my job was to assess what was wrong with it, or assessing a situation, Rwanda, for example, and its potential impact on Canadian troops or the situation there. I needed to be able to gather the right information and then analyze it for potential outcomes. And in many situations in which I worked, this was really critical to looking at what's the actual situation on the ground so that we can make a decision for that crisis situation. So again, I'll give you an example. I was in an IDP camp, internally displaced people camp in Darfur in Sudan, and a number of my accountants were taken hostage. Okay, so everybody says, oh, you're accountants, they don't have to worry about that, they're finance people, but those folks went out to make payments in the camp, and in fact, they were taken hostage. So it clearly took information gathering and critical analysis to determine the way forward. How were we going to respond? And we had to do it fairly quickly because they were being held. So one of our teams who worked with the water sanitation team had actually made some errors in payments to the IDPs who were working with them in the camp. And so as a result, I was able to take somebody who spoke the local language. I had a Palestinian colleague with me, so he spoke Arabic. He came with me. We negotiated the release of the hostages with promises that we would have the situation rectified within like 72 hours. And we did that. But without that critical analysis at the front end, it could have turned out completely different. So those were all really critical things to take with me.
Okay, so it's time management, it's teamwork, and it is critical analysis. So Beverly, you've worked in diverse and very high risk environment like Darfur, Haiti, Afghanistan, Pakistan. So wanted to understand what challenges did you face in adapting your expertise to such diverse and volatile environments, and how did you overcome them?
Okay. First of all, each of those locations is quite different from the other, just in and of themselves, culturally, the infrastructure that's available, the local capacity, are people educated or not? Do they speak the language or not? So we had different challenges that weren't necessarily associated with the conflict part. So, the conflict part was really just making sure that I was addressing that took my critical analysis. What kinds of security measures do we need in place? So we need to be able to assess that situation, do those security risk analysis, and make sure that we're identifying things that make sense in the environment that we're in. So in Haiti, for example, maybe I was using chain link fencing with razor wire in it. And in Afghanistan, I want something that's going to give me blast protection. Some places I want to have protection against kidnapping. Other places it's going to be against crime. So we have to take our skills as security managers and really identify what it is that we're looking at, because that security environment changes. And things that we expect or things that we anticipate in a normal situation might not even be there. So for example, in Afghanistan, I wasn't really worried about crime so much because our people didn't really move around all that easily that they would be affected by pickpockets. However, might they get kidnapped? Yes. Might they get caught in a checkpoint, conflict, something happened at a checkpoint? Yes. Could they get caught in crossfire? Yes. So, could they be caught in a bomb blast? Yes. So what are the things that we need to put in place for those? So that, I mean, it took using all of my skills, but also really interacting with the local community. And when I say that, I mean the locals I worked with, the local authorities, all of that. It depends on who I was working for. So the culture of the organization I worked for was really important. Um, the culture of working in an embassy, which I didn't there, in those high risk environments, I was working for either an NGO or a development organization. So either humanitarian or development, but then we were interacting with others, there might be those embassies, and how they approach security is different again from how we approach it. So they might be saying, oh my God, the sky is falling. And we're saying, how are we going to get from here to here? Because we have to do that job. So interacting with like-minded people to make sure that we're getting the information and how to get that information. That's not always clear either. So the situations were different. I wouldn't necessarily say it was challenges to adapt my expertise sometimes, but it was also the challenge for me to adapt to the situation. How I'm responding in that environment. The people I have working with me are different. So for I'll use Afghanistan again, also in Pakistan, we didn't have Gurkhas. In Afghanistan, we had Gurkhas working with us as well, Nepalese and Indian Gurkhas. So how to interact with them, because that was a different cultural group again. Learning how, like I say, staff, government authorities and all of that, but also interacting up and, talking to the senior management. And that's where my security skills become really, really important, because I have to be able to do that security risk assessment and then justify to that senior management why I need an extra 100,000, 500,000, 2 million, whatever amount of money it is. I have to be able to justify that. I can't be just throwing things at it. I can't be doing security theater. I have to be making sure I'm putting measures in place that really are going to have an impact and make sense. Because there's a limited budget. It doesn't matter who you're working for. And that changes too. So when I worked for an NGO, the budget, I'd be not getting what I needed might mean I can't have concertina wire for the top of the wall. In a development bank, it might be I can't have 5 more armored vehicles. So, but it still means that I have to justify it. It doesn't matter how much that pot is. I still need to be able to say why it is that I'm asking for those things and make it make sense. It's not just about budget, but it's about operations, how we're doing things. How are we moving people from A to B? Where can you and can you not go? Why can nationals go there and you can't as an international? Why can internationals do that and nationals can't? So you have to balance the different cultural nuances as well. So I would just say being open-minded, treating people with respect. They were critical to my ability to interact. I wouldn't say we can fully integrate because it was clear we were different. Doing the same thing with the various communities we worked with. I made a point of recognizing the experience that locals had in their environment, so I can learn from that. I had to park my ego at the door. Just because I'm an experienced security officer doesn't mean I know it all. So those locals had been fighting the war for a while, and I had to take from that and learn from that. I certainly wasn't going to be the one to tell them how to do it, so we had to interact respectfully. I also used my own personal characteristics to activate positive interaction. So a lot of people used to ask me about being a female security officer in Afghanistan, for example. And first of all, in Afghanistan, I wasn't looked at as an Afghan woman would be looked at. I was seen as this alien creature. They didn't understand, this is a woman and she's in a security role, and okay, she's not one of ours. Like, that's different, right? So I was kind of this alien. But I could go and visit the homes of officials. I could meet their wives, their mothers, their daughters. And that engendered trust on a different level than my male counterparts. They couldn't do that. They could not meet the family when they could go to the home and they could, probably drink a little bit because that happens and I don't, but some would, or smoke a little bit of shisha, have a whatever it was, they could do that, but they couldn't interact with the family, and I could. And so that changed the whole dynamic, and it really opened doors for me that I think wouldn't have been open had I not been a woman. So I really took what people saw as a challenge and an obstacle and made it something for
Oh,
me. Yeah.
wow. Okay, so it actually, the answer gets connected to my next question. I was about to ask that you've worked with so many different countries, different people, and as you mentioned, different people, different countries have different mindset. So I wanted to understand that how do you address cultural sensitivities while creating an empowerment programs in diverse regions?
Yeah, well, because when we're talking about empowerment programs, that's usually looking at when I'm interacting with women specifically. Um, so I have to say, we have to ensure that we don't judge the culture. So I can't say I've always respected how the culture addresses issues, but rather have to remain respectful when discussing it. So in the women's security program, for example, there are a lot of sensitive issues that have to be discussed in that training. And each culture has different norms that we might encounter that are different to what I would experience back home, different to what you would experience. So laws are different. Things are accepted as a norm, which I might not agree with, right? We're talking about domestic violence, sexual assault, rape, sexual harassment in the street, in the workplace, in the home, concerns that women have on a daily basis, but how they're addressed in that country, or how they're how they're addressed in that particular culture can shift. So for example, in one place that I went to, in one part of the country, domestic violence was at about 100%. And the reason that it was so high was culturally, it was the norm that boys were taught that women, that was part of what you did to keep women under control, was that you could, well, I'll say beat them. And, going in for me, that was one, it was very daunting. How am I going to talk to these women who experience this all the time? And how do I bring it up in a way that doesn't trigger somebody, or doesn't trigger me when I hear the stories? Because that's something, as a security officer, sometimes we have to put on a brave face and recognize that we're affected by these things when we're discussing them as well. That someone can tell you the story of what has happened to them, and we can be affected. And again, we can't judge. That's not for us to do. And we can't break down, maybe after, but when we're talking to them, we can't. So we have to maintain all of that. So anyways, I'm not here to say how we address what those issues are, or to address those issues, but rather the sensitivities. So I want to make sure that there's a safe space for the participants to share. They don't have to feel compelled to share. They've got to feel safe when they do that. No judgment. I said that already. Sometimes sharing my own experiences, if it's appropriate, because they also see me as this Western woman and they think nothing has ever happened to me. So building a bridge to say we're from different backgrounds, but things do happen no matter where we are. So, and making sure that we're not there wherever that place is to change a culture, but mainly to help these diverse groups work safely within a space or within an area. So the other thing that we can do is sometimes introduce a new thought process. That's not out of the question. We're not there to change the culture, but for example, things like judgment and victim blaming are often something that happens in cultures. And it's not always the patriarchy who do that. That could be from anybody, but discuss, that as victims, that's not their fault. And to start steering us away from that victim blaming kind of thing. So there's lots of things around the cultural issues, but we really just have to be non-judgmental and respectful, and understand our limitations.
Okay. That was so inspiring, very inspiring. It brings me to the next question that what inspired you to integrate martial arts into your security work, particularly focusing on women empowerment?
Okay, well, it was actually the Women's Security Awareness Training. It's a UN course that I teach, and I'm a certified instructor. But that developed my interest in my further activity in martial arts. The self-defense module is it's optional because there's not always a certified instructor to teach it. And I knew that I just would not, I felt it was really important to introduce some element of self-defense, mainly for confidence building and to make the participants understand that they can do it. Obviously, in an hour and a half session, they're not coming away as Bruce Lee, right? But I also felt like I needed to be certified as an instructor in order to be able to teach this. I felt I couldn't do this fraudulently and just go in and say, oh yeah, I know that one technique, so I'm going to show it. I needed to have a background so I could explain it and discuss with them. And I was really, really lucky. I started working on my programs to become a certified self-defense instructor while I was in Afghanistan. I had an opportunity to meet with James Smart. He's a well-known Gracie Jiu-Jitsu black belt who was there for some time. And everybody knew that I did Jiu-Jitsu, and they said, hey, James is here, you got to meet him. And I just started training with him, made arrangements for him. I had my own dojo in my dining room because I couldn't go out to a gym. So James would come over and we would train every day. So he encouraged me to pursue the Gracie Combatives and the Gracie Women Empowered instructor programs. He also had a program called Street Smart in Cape Town. And I went to Cape Town to become an instructor in that program as well. And what I love about these programs is that they consider the perspective of a woman and the nuances of security issues as they affect women or impact women. So one example that I always give to the students, and I give them a link to a video, Eve Torres Gracie and Henry Gracie, they developed a video called 6 Creepy Hug Defenses.
Okay.
And that's definitely not something that would be thought of in a traditional self-defense program. They also had self-defense against creepy belly rubbers for pregnant women.
Okay.
So really looking at the issues that affect women, how they affect women, framing techniques in a way that women understand why they're going to do that technique. So understanding the background of, the fact that most sexual assaults are perpetrated by somebody who's known to you. So that means it could be in your home. So that changes where you are when that happens. And so the techniques are around that. How do we deal with that? Anyways, I teach this introduction to the women. I make sure they know it's simply to make them think about situational awareness. So it's not all, we're not doing anything like that. It's how to be aware of the things that are happening around me, how to recognize what a bad guy looks like as he or she approaches me. Boundary setting. That's something that there's a difference between what men and women, how they react in a security situation. Women don't boundary set very well. We will allow people into our space because we don't want to offend them. We think we'll look stupid if we say something. You know, there's a number of reasons for us to not say something. And I won't say they're not valid, they're ingrained in us, but we need to start changing that mindset around boundary setting. For men, it's de-escalation because I don't know if it's testosterone that gets in the way, but somebody says, you know, I'm bigger, no, I'm bigger, no, I'm bigger, and it escalates. And they're not very good at knowing how to back out of something. So there's a difference between how men and women respond in a security situation. And so that situational awareness, boundary setting, I thought it's really important for women to understand that. Understand that in that session, they're simply discovering that they don't need to be Arnold Schwarzenegger, but also knowing that what they're learning is intended to help them find the place to go and train and to know that they can do it, to not be afraid to step across the threshold of a self-defense program, but how to look for the right self-defense program as well. So yeah, recognizing those innate vulnerabilities that women have with respect to security, that really drove me to develop myself so that I can share appropriate knowledge.
You have addressed such important points. So, thank you for addressing these insightful and important points about situational awareness and how men and women respond differently. So, thank you for that. Now, coming on the last question, you're recognized for exceptional leadership and team building skills. So, what do you believe are the most important qualities of a leader in high risk environment?
We have to remember that we have to lead them too. We have to make sure that we're doing everything to make sure they understand what it is that we have to do and understand why it is that we're doing it. So I would say professionalism in everything that we do. We have to make sure that we're maintaining our professionalism, updating our professionalism, always looking to learn new ways of doing things, to be open-minded and take that in and make ourselves as professional as we can be as security managers. We need to set the example. Sorry, I can hear some background noise. Yeah, so setting the example. In Afghanistan, I couldn't be saying to one group, okay, you have to, excuse me, you have to do things this way, if I wasn't going to do it this way as well. So really important to make sure we're doing that. Adaptability, and that can be adaptability on the fly. You know, we might just have to say, you know what, we made a mistake. We got to fix that and go this way now. Communications, making sure that we're communicating the right way with whichever audience we're addressing, because each audience is different. So we have to address them in a way that makes sense to them. Conflict resolution, understanding how to quickly resolve conflicts within the team or with the authorities. And that can often take with what we used to call diplo speak, that people would come to me and say, could you like rewrite this memo for me? Because I want it to be in diplo speak. Because we have to address things in a way that's telling people what we want, getting what we want, but helping them to understand and to be on board with it. And finally, you know, I already mentioned some other things that we want to look at is treating people with respect and no judgment. Did I make mistakes? Absolutely. Recognizing them, working on my leadership weaknesses, improving all the time, and learning from my mistakes, that also set the right example.
Absolutely. Your journey has been truly inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing the valuable insights and different experiences from your journey. Thank you so much. And it was an absolute pleasure having you here with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. It's really a pleasure to speak to you, and I hope that at some point I'm going to be there and be able to meet live.
Looking forward to that. Would really like to have an empowerment session with you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much.